83 years ago, China began its whole-of-nation resistance war against Japanese aggression. There were two battlefields. The battlefield behind enemy lines disrupted Japanese invaders' strategic arrangements. The battlefield covered the North China Plain, northwest and southwest of Shanxi, and central Hebei. In 1941, the situation in central Hebei became increasingly difficult for China as the Japanese ramped up their destructions. Due to a severe lack of armed support, the militias and guerrillas had to come up with an idea to minimize their sacrifice in the battlefield. They started to dig long tunnels beneath their houses. And what happened in the later years proved that this is very useful. The underground facilities were built in order to attack and defend. The militias and guerrillas around Ranzhuang village pioneered this type of warfare, and in much of central Hebei there were elaborate tunnel networks connecting the houses. This room hides a tunnel entrance, but at first glance it looks just like a typical living room in rural China at the time. This is a brick bed, a stove, and other necessities. But if you pick up the pot, you will see this is actually where the secret entrance is. Almost every household in the village had tunnel entrances like this one. They were usually hidden beneath a straw mat, down a well, or by a stove like what we just saw. Now let's see what's it like underneath. Now here we are. Oh, this tunnel is just a perfect hiding spot. And as you can see, it also has numerous hidden gun holes for firing surprise shots. And the Japanese outside the tunnel would see bullets coming from different places, but they couldn't see where the people were. But the Japanese sometimes filled the tunnels with water, trying to drown the people inside. So the Chinese installed door panels that would reverse the water flow. Besides creating floods, the Japanese would also fill the tunnels with smoke and even poisonous gases. To deal with this, the militias prepared planks covered with blanket as screens. Also, traps were set near the entrance so the enemy could be captured. It's usually pretty dark inside the tunnel. That's when gaslights come in handy. The average tunnel in Ranzhuang is 1.5 meters tall and 2 meters wide. In some lower areas like where I am right now, you need to bend down a bit to move forward. Over here is a bamboo speaking tube which allowed the militias to communicate when they were apart. They could also tap on the tube to send signals when they couldn't speak. Baskets and ropes can transport supplies. Look, someone is sending me a rifle. The entire underground infrastructure also features command posts, storage rooms, and even infirmaries. A storage unit like this can provide enough food for militias in hiding for days. And temporary infirmaries like this can provide treatment for injuries. As the war went on, the tunnels in Ranzhuang gradually developed into a comprehensive network connecting all villages. The total length reached 16 kilometers with 4 main lines 11 east-west branches and 13 north-south branches. All these together formed an impregnable underground defensive system. Now coming out of the tunnel, it was time for the militias to turn their strategy from defensive to offensive. As you can see from this illustration, militias hid themselves at tunnel exits and posts disguised as homes. Japanese troops would encounter unexpected attacks by militias while raiding villages. The tunnels didn't just connect the regional villages, but also the nearby areas. And that's usually where the Japanese troops built their bases or turrets. This watchtower-like structure was the core of a turret, but the whole system was in fact a lot bigger. The turrets were often surrounded by walls and fences, and there were usually trenches and other protections, such as barbed wire, outside the walls. A turret was usually built with wood and bricks, stopped by a dozen soldiers and equipped with a machine gun. This kind of setup was vulnerable to heavy arms, like a cannon. But it was more than enough to counter the poorly armed Chinese guerrillas. That's why it quickly became a common way of defense for the Japanese troops in central Hebei. Without proper weapons, a direct confrontation with the enemy was not feasible for the Chinese guerrillas. So instead, they hid inside the tunnels around the turrets and gradually cut off the enemy's food and water supply. In addition, they made numerous small but surprise attacks in order to slowly drain the enemy's energy. When the Japanese were eventually worn out, the militias and guerrillas from different villages united to launch final attacks. The Japanese aggression in China lasted 14 years until Japan's surrender in 1945. About 14 million Chinese soldiers and civilians were wounded and 21 million were killed. During the difficult time, tunnel warfare protected villages from Japanese invaders and made the North China Plain an important battle.